Opening slide graphic text title, Motivating Learners to Learn, with image of John Armstrong. Logos, Belonging Matters and TalksThatMatter.net.
Hi everyone. I have just a little bit of material for you this afternoon that I hope you'll enjoy. And it relates to some material that was developed many, many years ago by Wolf. So you might see this material as being an adjunct to what you've learned in SRV. And some of you may have independently come across many of these principles that we're about to discuss. So let me just bring us up onto the PowerPoint here. So I hope you can see that okay. And for our discussion group today, what I'm wanting to focus on, of course, is the idea of competency enhancement. We've learned in SRV, let me get back to this one. We've learned in SRV this combination of competency with image and how they each contribute to the acquisition of a valued social role. And quite often, I think we get to very much focus on imagery, which is very important because it often establishes the expectations of the observer right off the bat. So very rapidly, observers tend to react to what imagery and symbolism might be surrounding someone. But of late, I see more of a deterioration, you might say, in our facilitation of learning and growing. Perhaps that's taken place because of the emphasis we have now on rights and perhaps the idea that people should be just treated well, irrespective of anything that surrounds them, and therefore they don't have to do anything. They just have to be, and they should be accepted for that anyway. Now, that's not concordant with SRV, because we think over the long run, people are going to respond to what they see. And one of the things they see are the competencies that people have in relation to the roles that they're acquiring. And therefore, there's a part to be played in terms of assisting people to learn and grow. There's a number of really good reasons for this that we covered, of course, in the SRV event, but there's some additional ideas too. And one of them has to do with three ideas that we all need to have in order to function well, it seems, and to feel secure, and even to feel secure as a learner, because there is a bit of anxiety that learning itself produces, and that if we're not secure enough, learning is very hard for us to be engaged with. We shy away from it and want to escape it, something I'll come back to. And these three ideas are, and all of us from the very youngest age have been striving to get clear answers to these three things. And the first one is, are we good? And you might say, are we acceptable? Am I an acceptable person in the eyes of most other people? Very important first question. The second one is, am I competent? Is there something I can do and be known for? Am I competent? And the third aspect is, am I worthy of love? And you might say we all need to function well. We need some pretty clear affirmative answers to those three questions. Am I good? Am I competent? Am I worthy of love? And it is interesting that when we see young children struggle, it's often against these three questions that they're struggling, because they can't find clear answers to that. They're not being given clear answers. And of course, bullies go for these as well. So when a bully picks on someone, it's these three things. No one wants to be your friend. You're an idiot. You can't do anything. So you see these three questions being poked at, especially by a bully. And of course, if a child knows where they stand in regard to these three questions, well, they're not bothered by, some ridiculous comment that someone has about them. They remain secure. So today we want to have a look at how we might help and assist someone to grow and learn. And one of the things I get approached about a lot is that, well, the people I support aren't interested in learning anything. And I often imagine, what's going on there where someone doesn't want to grow and learn? And are there other aspects to do with their security? So let's have a look at this. So there are three levels of learning that we might consider here. The first is the most shallow level, where a person does something because they either get approval for it, a reward, or they get the threat of punishment, or something good not happening, much like eat your broccoli. And if you do eat your broccoli, you'll get dessert. But if you don't eat your broccoli, you won't, So we often, and this is a starting point for a lot of learning for a lot of people. And of course, when they're young and you can get away with that, if they're 16, you often know they're bigger than me now and I can't get away with this. This idea, but it does bring into mind the idea of a consequence, and that's an important thing for people to learn, that there's a consequence to the decisions that they have. And but it's a very shallow level of learning, because essentially I'll only do it while the short-term payoff or threat of punishment exists. If that's not there, I'm not going to eat my broccoli. I prefer not to, hate the stuff, whatever, So it's only under the conditions that you might say where reward or punishment is present. A deeper level of, and I hope you're seeing that, is that right? Is identification. And identification here means identify with someone. And so often we find that lots of kids, for instance, have sporting stars, and they follow along with those sporting stars, dress like they do, want to play like they do, handle the tennis racket the way our star does, hopefully not like Nick Kyrgios, who smashes quite a few, and things like that. And so the nature of this is a little bit deeper, but it is tied to the nature of the relationship, and usually only while that relationship exists. So it's deeper than compliance, but it too is still reliant on something that's external to the learner. The deepest level, of course, though, is to learn things that are internalized, which means what the person is doing and what they're learning are one of the same thing. They've embraced this, and they are the ones that are driving the desire to learn. So this is why it's easier to learn things that you love. In a sense, you want to do this for yourself. You don't need anyone offering you a reward, or, I'll get out of doing something horrible if I do it. It's not based on that kind of reward and punishment. It's who I am. And so what I'm learning is congruent with who I am. And so that's a much deeper level. So you might say in heading towards competency for someone, it's this internalized level that we're trying to head, and that we want to head into. Now you might say, so given that that's our definition of learning, then what might help a person be motivated to learn? And of course, these, you've seen it in action all your life. You know it, that it exists in your own life, that teacher that you had that bond with. And not only did you just love the teacher, you loved what they taught you and what they had for you to learn. And you may have been turned on to history because you had a great history teacher. And so it's a very interesting thing, because you may learn to love something that you didn't previously love as a result of the relationship you have with someone. So here's an interesting example. I've had this example for many years, as you can see, 2001, and because I know the people in this picture as well. And this is quite a few years ago, and there was a write-up in the paper about, and it shared the nature of the relationship to some extent. And so here's the teacher saying, it's satisfying to see how these kids now develop into terrific young people who will do well in life. And Ms. Lynch said it was also necessary at times to look beyond the students, see them as a kid. They might have just broken up with their boyfriend. You have to look at their personal life, listen to them. Sometimes you're the only support they have. And she says, I love my job. You have to love to teach to be in there. You're an educator and a role model, which makes you conscious of your actions. So that's interesting, given that we were just talking about some of the aspects and the talents of a support worker. And here we are seeing a teacher speaking to much the same thing as it affects her in her teaching role. Now, what does the student have to say? She said, well, You need teachers with authority who show you that they won't take any misbehaving and who give you respect, and then they get it back if they do that. She said, in years 7 to 10, you don't realize teachers are on your side and you try and fight it. But my perspective has changed a lot now. And I have 5 teachers and I see them as friends. Wow, lucky 5 teachers that she looks at this way. She said she appreciated the openness of her teachers as she took on the pressures of year 12. They give us home numbers if we need them. And as long as you're willing to give up your time, they'll put in the hours as well. And here's an interesting statement. She said, there were some lessons she would always recall. And I imagine that you are probably the same in regard to your recall of some of the best teachers that you've had in your life, whether at school or whether in your career, and people who you've formed and had that relationship with. So it's very, very motivating. And so the same for a support worker, being that model, much like the teacher just mentioned, is such an important and valuable thing. Another aspect is bringing then the learner's drive state to the optimal level. And this means engendering a sense of security in the learner, like enough security that they're willing to take a risk, learning something they've never done before, which introduces a level of anxiety and therefore having to still give it a go. Now, drive is an interesting aspect, and here we see a graph that tries to illustrate the idea that you can have sometimes too low a drive, you're just not interested, and other times where you're too excitable to really concentrate and knuckle down because I'm too distracted, and distraction is a real issue for many people. You need something in the middle, at the bottom of that curve. You don't want to be too high. You don't want to be too low. And you might have noticed this if some of you have cats and dogs, and cats are a good example, because if cats are well fed, they're not bothered with you. They just want to go and get in a sunny corner and go to sleep. They have very low drive because all of their needs are met. But if they're really hungry, then they're driving you nuts. Meow, 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 So they're high drive, and you need something in the middle, and then they'll interact with you, maybe even play with your dog if you have a cat like that, and get up to mischief and want to play with some wool or something. They're in the middle. They're not too high because they're bothered by their hunger, and neither are they too low because they're satiated. It means all their needs are met. And why should I be bothered? You need something. And we shift through this all the time, don't we? We don't always catch the learner at quite the right level. And sometimes the drive is too high, as we sometimes see with people with ADHD and autism, especially in a context where the environment is introducing far too many distractions and stimuli that allows the person now to more relax and be in a state where learning is possible. And that's a whole workshop in itself. Now, we'll come back to everyone, of course, in a moment and have a look at some questions you might have. Here's a powerful one. Is what you are doing the exact thing this person now needs to learn next? And I think of my tennis. I used to play a lot of tennis before my body started to collapse on me. And one of the things I found really hard to do was a topspin backhand when I was in a competition match. Now, I could do them in practice because I wasn't under the same pressure. I was in that low end, but in a competition, often anxiety levels start to get a bit heightened. And I wouldn't be game to do a topspin backhand. I wasn't confident and secure enough in it. But that was the exact next thing I needed to learn. Whereas if I had a lesson that was trying to teach me things I already knew, I'd get easily bored with it. There's a related aspect here too, is that when a learner gets to do the thing that they're learning, it's really obvious, but in many contexts, you see the staff are doing everything. The staff are making dinner. The staff are cutting up the veggies. the staff of whatever it's doing, operating the machinery. But it's wonderful for people to do that themselves, so that natural developmental growth and readiness sequence means I get to do it. I'm not just watching someone else do it. It's my turn, and I get to do that. And that really creates great motivation. I have a granddaughter with Down syndrome, and she and her sister, we see them at least once and often more a week. And when Lynn's cooking, Kess loves nothing better than to help Lynn in the kitchen. So from a very young age, Lynn had her cutting, not with the sharpest knife, but with a knife that could cut. And that so shocked sometimes that parents would walk in and know, what has she got in her hands? Well, she was having a ball. She was cutting stuff and doing a really good job. And now she is working. She's 11 now, and she's working with quite sharp knives. She's never cut herself. And she just does a really excellent job. And part of it is that she's always being challenged on what the next step is, to have a go at the next step. And especially if it's something that her sister hasn't done yet. And so she's very motivated to do that. And so that's just as an example. And so here's the opportunity then to actually perform the task and to do it and to be the one who's up front, whatever that is. And of course, cooking is a very good task for people because you get to transform it. So one of the things they get to see is the butter melting and sizzling, the smell of the whatever you put in the pan, the changing of the color and texture and nature, and then you get to eat it. So you might say the change they're producing itself is a motivating force. It's intrinsically motivating to see that the effect that you're having before your very eyes. And yet I meet so many people who aren't allowed in the kitchen. It's a very, very, very sad thing. Now, let's have a look at some of these aspects being brought together in this little video and see what you think. I'm hoping everyone can see this.
So I'm going to train you on this, but I'm not going to say much, but I'm going to be here to help you. All right. Yeah. So I'm going to do a demonstration first. Do you want to watch me do it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. My mistake. And then we know that we've done it right because it turns around. Can you see that thing? Okay. All right. So I'm going to leave that one there. And now we're going to have a go at it together. All right. I'm not going to say much. I'm going to be here to help you. All right.
So you rub his hands together. To see how much attention Jack was giving to it too.
Go another way. Try another way. Why not weights? A little bit more. Want to test it? See if it works. I'll give you a hug.
Okay. So we'll get to talk about that in a moment. And one last thing to leave with you then, and that lovely demonstration of when things are taught that a person's motivated in, and also introduced in a way the person can follow, which is often visually by demonstration, as opposed to a lot of talking, almost no talking, just a couple of cues with the finger and try another way. That's all she had to do, and how well he did. A couple of things, though, that stand in the way of people when they're learning, and this is everyone. One is resistance, and resistance means that the person doesn't want to or doesn't believe that they can do something. So one aspect of this, of course, is to try and break things down into such small steps that the person can't help but succeed. So often we have to take smaller steps so the person can see and therefore is less resistant to the idea of learning. The second one, though, is to be distracted by other things. And one of the things that's distracting people today is that if oneself is a victim, and therefore one is owed lots of things. by definition. And so people are being invited into victimhood somewhat. And it means that they don't have to press forward themselves. And the antidote to that, of course, is to be thankful for what you have. Now, that doesn't mean that you deny the bad things that might have happened, but to be focused somewhat more on what you have in front of you, what you've got going for you, and therefore not to be distracted, and to use it as an excuse actually for not doing certain things and moving forward. And then there might be also the lack of discipline, and this is established more through patterns of routine, when to get up, and especially for young children, it really involves just three things: learning to eat, learning to sleep, and learning to toilet properly. And at the right times. And all of that sets the stage for good discipline that then to many, many other things. And that the discipline then applies itself even to learning and what you might learn.
Closing slide graphic text with thanks to John Armstrong. Web address johnarmstrong.media and Imagine More. Web address imaginemore.org.au. This video was made possible with the support of an Information and Capacity Building grant through the Department of Social Services. Produced by Belonging Matters. Belonging Matters makes every effort to provide accurate and up-to-date material. However, information is subject to change and our material is for reference only. This video is produced on the land of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people and Ngunnawal people. Logos Belonging Matters, Imagine More and TalksThatMatter.net.